Hello and welcome to my Yugioh channel. Today we're going to be looking at the Yugioh Master Duel update, which happened on March the 9th, and this will cover both an overview and the full description of the cards which are within the brand new set that's just been released. It says here that there's been a confirmation of Duelist Cup for March 2023. For anyone who isn't aware of that, it's a cup that they run every so often, and it's a good way of getting gems. Typically within these events you get anywhere between 500 to 1,000 gems if you can get to the higher levels. And even if you don't, I think there are alternative wins which allow you to actually meet these conditions and get other gems as well. So if you duel a certain number of times within a day, then you get maybe 50 gems. There are other ones where if you inflict a certain amount of damage or destroy a certain number of monsters within that duel, you get a period of that level of power and that number of gems. And usually those are kind of set out within a period of time. So as long as the event is going, I think you can have access to those gems. For example, if you destroy 5 monsters, you might get 20 gems. You get destroy 10 monsters, you get another 20 gems, all the way up to 30, and I think you get 5 or 6 delineations on that, so you could get maybe up to 150 gems just on that catalogue alone. And that's actually a good way of maybe getting some packs if you don't have the money to purchase any. Speaking of which, I will also be making a video soon. I mean, I went crazy with the brand new packs, the brand new support. I actually did spend quite a bit to get myself into the getting some of the brand new support, and I actually ended up getting 2 of the Kurikari Defy Carnuts, which I was amazed at. Even with what I spent and kind of the number of packs I got, I still couldn't actually get all the cards. I think I was missing about 2 or 3, but that'll be in a separate video which I will at some point list down below. In this we have additionally those leveling up to D level 4 will increase their D level even if they lose a match, so you're no longer going to be, if you get to level 4, you're not going to be downgraded as such. So long as you keep winning from that point, you're just not going to go below that level. The new selection pack is called Strong Will, in addition to the new Yugioh archetype, which is seen within Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, which utilizes link arrows for both attack and defense. There are a number of new cards that give new brilliance to Gem Knight and Crystal Beasts, as well as Ancient Angels that manipulate this world, and Underworld to bring about reversed destinies. Regardless of whether you opt for solid defense or tricky tactics, the strength of your will as a duelist will be tested. So currently we're going to go through the ultra rares. Ultimate Crystal Rainbow Dragon Overdrive is a level 12 light attribute dragon type fusion effect monster with 4,000 attack and 0 defense. It requires a ultimate crystal monster and 7 crystal beast monsters to summon it, and must be special summoned from your extra deck using a duel. You special summoned an ultra crystal monster by banishing the above monsters from your field and or graveyard, or 7 or more of your crystal beast monsters with different names are banished. This card gains 7,000 attack points. If this card has not battled this turn, as a quick effect you contribute this card, shuffle as many cards on the field as possible into the deck, and if you do, special summon any number of your banished crystal beast monsters. This is a particularly powerful monster within the crystal beast deck, as it's a variation on the Rainbow Dragon. Initially its summoning condition can be quite difficult, as you need to have basically summoned an ultimate crystal monster already, so that means it could be one of the Rainbow Dragons, it could be the Dark Rainbow Dragon, any of those, and that basically has to have been any point within the duel before you get to summon this card. You also need to have the 7 crystal beast monsters already banished basically to use this type of effect. When you do so, this becomes an 11,000 attack monster, so it's going to be quite difficult for your opponent to get over it. Although saying that, they could just use a spell or trap card to remove it. It doesn't actually have any protection in and of itself, but as a nice bonus, by a quick effect, by just tributing this card, you're able to just shuffle and reset everyone's decks and any cards on the field as possible, and then you're just able to resummon all your crystal beast monsters. If you're in the later stage of the duel, that could be enough to defeat your opponent with the amount of damage you can get on board. This is Gem Knight Lady Brilliant Diamond. It is an earth attribute rock type fusion effect monster, level 10 with 3,400 attack and 2,000 defense. It requires 3 Gem Knight monsters to summon it, and it must first be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. You can only special summon Gem Knight Lady Brilliant Diamond once per turn. Once per turn you can send 1 Gem Knight monster you control to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 Gem Knight fusion monster from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. This is the main boss monster within the Gem Knight archetype, considering initially you did have Master Diamond, but that's a bit weaker. This is able to just summon itself actually quite easily. It just generically needs 3 Gem Knight monsters. It doesn't need any specifically named ones, so its summoning conditions aren't bad. It being 3,400 attack points makes it stronger than most of your average boss monsters within archetypes such as Blue blue eyes white dragons, or your dark magicians, or your red eyes black dragons. The condition on its summoning as well is not too bad. It does have to be hard summoned once per turn, so there is that restriction, but if you could summon multiple within a turn, that would be overpowered. By simply trading in one of your Gem Knight monsters, this includes itself, by the way, it can be used as the tribute. You can just summon any of your Gem Knight fusion monsters from your extra deck, totally ignoring their summoning conditions. So depending on how the deck is run and what you're facing against your opponent, you may want various types of effects. For example, I think Topaz has the ability to attack twice in a turn, and can, if it destroys your opponent's monster in battle, inflict burn damage equivalent to that monster's attack points. If you can run over two of your opponent's monsters, you can do quite a bit of damage in that one turn, and you can potentially OTK. You've got Garnet, which can also boost its attack points by trading in a Gem Knight monster, and it also does piercing battle damage, so if your opponent has a defensive monster, you can inflict some battle damage in that turn. You have other ones that return, I think, spell and trap cards. Amethyst returns spell and trap cards to the hand when it's summoned, so that's a good way if you want to protect your monsters from any type of effects. You have another one which happens to protect from card destruction once per turn as its effect. There are so many varieties that you can actually rely upon, and it's just limited to your imagination and your knowledge of the deck what you can do with them. Gravekeeper's Oracle is a dark attribute spellcaster type level 10 with 2000 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect is you can tribute 3 monsters or 1 Gravekeeper's monster to tribute summon but not set this card. When this card is tribute summoned, you can activate any of these effects and resolve in sequence up to the number of Gravekeeper monsters tributed for its summon. This card gains attack equal to the combined levels that all monsters tributed for its tribute summon had on the field times 100, or you can destroy all set monsters your opponent controls, or all monsters your opponent currently controls lose 2000 attack and defense points. So this is based on an order, and depending on how many tributes you've used, you can go for either one of these effects, 2 of these effects, or all 3 of the effects. If you happen to use all 3 effects, that's the best case scenario. It does restrain the field presence for you for the turn, as you are totally wiping out most of your field, assuming you've only got 3 monsters on the field, but it does gain the advantage of gaining points as part of the first section of the effect. The second effect just wipes out all set monsters your opponent controls, so if they've got a defensive based deck, that's a good way of destroying those, and if your opponent happens to have any face-up monsters, they lose 2000 attack and defense points, so this can actually be quite useful. Essentially, the second and third effects can be counterintuitive with each other, as one relies on destroying set cards, and set cards don't have any revealed stats, and so they won't be affected by the third effect, whereas if they're using the third effect and are revealed, whether they're in defense position or attack position, they aren't set, so the second effect just won't work. Unfortunately, because of the way it sequences, that means that you have to use all 3 effects if you have any of your opponent's monsters that are in face-up attack or defense position. Alternatively, if you really only want to go for the first 2 effects, then just use the 2 tributes and you'll get what you need. Rainbow Dragon is a level 10 light attribute dragon type effect monster with 4000 attack and 0 defense. Its effect is this card is always treated as an ultimate crystal card. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand by having 7 crystal beast cards with different names on your field and or graveyard. This card cannot activate the following effects the turn it is special summoned. As a quick effect, you can send all crystal beast monsters you control to the graveyard. This card gains 1000 attack for each monster sent to the graveyard. You can banish all crystal beast monsters from your graveyard, shuffle all cards onto the field into the deck. The summoning requirement on this card may sound quite tricky, but considering the number of crystal beast based support cards which search from the deck, even including themselves, means that actually getting the 7 different crystals in your field or actually in your graveyard isn't particularly too difficult. As a quick effect, just by sending all crystal beast monsters you control to the graveyard, so those can be actually in your field zone or actually in your spell and trap zone, it gains 1000 attack for each, so potentially if you've got all 7 on the field in some capacity, this becomes a 11,000 attack monster. And the other effect, to just banish all crystal beast monsters, lets you just shuffle all cards on the field into the deck. This could be particularly useful if your opponent doesn't have anything in their hand, you have cards in your hand, and they've actually invested too heavily into their field. By sending all those cards back, it makes it very difficult for your opponent to recover. Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond is a level 8 Earth attribute fairy type fusion effect monster with 2700 attack and 2400 defense. It requires as fusion material 1 Gem Knight monster and 1 fairy monster. Once per opponent's turn, the first time a Gem Knight monster you control would be destroyed by a card effect, it is not destroyed. During your turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect, you can banish 1 Gem Knight card from your graveyard and target 1 face-up card your opponent controls and destroy it. The summoning requirement on this card isn't too difficult, difficult, there is actually a brand new card that came alongside Lady Rose Diamond, which happens to be both a Gemini monster and a Fairy monster, so it can be treated as either of the requirements. The reason that it's paired very much like this is because if you consider that one of the characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, they were using the Gemini archetype, and they were facing off against Zuzu Boyle, who was one of the main characters within Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, and she was using a deck called the Melodious Archetypes, and that used fairy type monsters, so there's the combination of that. The effect itself lets your Gemini monsters be protected from being destroyed by card effects once per turn, so this is a consistent effect. It does have to be during your opponent's turn, so there is that limitation, but during your turn, if your opponent activates a monster effect, again, this is a downside. If they don't have any effects which are quick effects, you can't really rely on this, but if you get the benefits of it, you're able to just wipe out your opponent's card. It has to be a face-up card, which is also another downside, so there are quite a few limitations despite it being a brand new Gem Knight support card. Also, the Earth Channeler is a Earth attribute level 5 spellcaster monster with 1850 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect is this card is always treated as a Charmer card. You can discard this card and one Earth monster to add one Earth monster from your deck to your hand with 1850 or less attack, whose original type is the same as one of those discarded cards. Also, you cannot activate non-Earth monster effects for the rest of this turn. When your Earth monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only use each effect of also the Earth Channeler once per turn. The requirement on this card isn't particularly too difficult, although it is a level 5 monster. Just by having another Earth monster being destroyed by battle, you can instantly bring this card out. And its actual effect doesn't rely on it being summoned onto the field. It actually relies on being discarded, so there's also a counter reason why level 5 isn't a bad thing. By discarding this and another Earth monster, you're able to just search for another Earth monster. It does have to be 1850 or less attack, so there is a restriction to it, and it has to be one of the typings of what you discarded. So since this is a spellcaster type monster, you either have to search for an Earth spellcaster under that condition, or whatever you discarded. So if you discarded a beast type, you could search for a beast type. If you discarded a warrior type, you could get a warrior type. So long as those meet those conditions, you're fine. It is quite limited, and it does require a lot of a cost to actually bring out and search for a specific card, only for it to be ash blossomed or to be negated by any type of effect, so there is a massive downside to it. I hope in the future they are going to be upgrading these to have actual boss monsters for the deck rather than just the Charmers themselves. Maybe upgrades of those as, 2500 plus attack points. Kelbeck the Ancient Vanguard is an Earth attribute fairy type level 4 with 1500 attack and 1800 defense. And its effect is if a card is sent from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard except during a damage step, you can target one special summoned monster your opponent controls, special summon this card from your hand, then return that monster to the hand. If this card is sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you can activate this effect. Each player sends the top 5 cards of their deck to the graveyard, or their entire deck, if less than 5. Then, if Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can set one trap from your graveyard. You can only use each effect of Kelbeck the Ancient Vanguard once per turn. This card is one of a series of new upgrades to Ishizu's cards, which were also named by their first bit of the name, so Kelbeck is actually the upgrade of Kelbeck. By just your opponent having a card sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you're able to target a special summon monster your opponent controls and special summon this card by returning that particular target to the hand. So if they happen to go into an extra deck monster, that means they go back to the extra deck rather than the hand. And if this happens to be sent from the hand to the graveyard or from the deck, that means you're able to send 5 cards from yours and your opponent's deck to the graveyard. If that's not going to be harming you so much as it's going to be harming your opponent, as that actually diminishes their resources. And you're also able to then, as a bonus effect, if you have Exchange with the Spirit in the graveyard, be able to just set one of your trap cards that potentially you've set by its effect from the graveyard back to your field. You're getting that continuous type of advantage that your opponent isn't going to be able to capitalize on. Keldo the Sacred Protector is an Earth attribute fairy type effect monster. It's a level 4 with 1200 attack and 1600 defense. Its effect is you can discard one other Earth attribute fairy monster, special summon this card from your hand, then you can add one Exchange of the Spirit, one card that mentions it from your deck to your hand. As a quick effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard, then target up to 3 cards in any graveyards or up to 5 if Exchange of the Spirit is on your field or in your graveyard. Shuffle them into the deck. You can only use each effect of Keldo the Sacred Protector once per turn. The benefit of this card is this can instantly just be special summoned by discarding another Earth attribute attribute fairy monster. So since the other ones are all of that typing and attributes, that's not a difficult condition to meet. By doing this, you're able to then search for any of the exchange of spirit cards, or one that lists this in the name, so that's fine. And by banishing this card from the field or graveyard, you're able to recover any cards between 3 and 5 from the graveyard back into the deck, so you're able to reset the cards that you've sent by other effects. G-Golem Pebble Dog is an Earth attribute Cyverse type effect monster. It's level 2 with 300 attack and 1000 defense. The effect is, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add to your hand or special summon one G-Golem Pebble Dog from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except Cyverse monsters. If this card is sent from the field from the hand to the graveyard, you can add one G-Golem card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of G-Golem Pebble Dog once per turn. As soon as this card is normal summoned or special summoned, you're able to just add one specific card. It has to be another copy of itself from the deck, so that's fine. And if it's sent from the hand to the graveyard, you're just able to search for another type of card. It's a main searcher within the deck, so it adds to the consistency. Kurikara Divakarnate is a fire attribute fairy type level 1 with 1500 attack and 1500 defense. The effect is, it cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand by tributing all face-up monsters on the field that activated their effects this turn in your opponent's monster zone. It gains 1500 attack for each monster attributed to special summon this card. During the end phase, you can target one monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field. You can only use this effect of Kurikara Divakarnate once per turn. This is the card that I mentioned that I actually got 2 copies of, but I did have to really go into it. I had to pretty much use all the gems just specifically on this set to be able to get that opportunity, and I can tell you I opened probably near enough 100 packs of this just to get a chance of, you know, decently getting these cards. It is not easy. It's a particularly powerful card because if you think of the kaijus, which are just able to tribute over your opponent's monsters without having to interact with any sort of effects or negations, it's a good way of clearing your opponent's high resource monsters. This does that, but at a grander scale. Depending on when you time this, and if you can know what your opponent is playing and how many summons they're going into before you can actually max out on this card's attack, you can wipe out all of those opponent's monsters, and this gains 1500 attack for each of them. So if you can get this, even if worst case scenario you can only just get one of those, this becomes a 3000 attack monster. It's not that this card is starting with 0 attack points. It already has 1500 as a standard base rate attack. If you can get rid of a typical standard board which might consist of about 3 cards, you're getting this card to 6000 attack points, in which case your opponent is going to find it quite difficult to get over this card or to recover the resources to do anything about it. The other thing is, during the end phase, you're just able to constantly recover your opponent's cards each and every one of your turns, so the longer the duel goes on for, the more likely it's going to stack in your favour. I mean, they're not going to recover anything if you're able to get their Baron de Fleur or any of their Sword Soul Synchro monsters or anything like that very quickly. G-Golem Invalid Dolmen is an Earth attribute Cyverse type link effect monster, and it requires 2 or more Earth attribute monsters with 2800 attack points. Its effect is, co-linked monsters you control are unaffected by monster effects activated on your opponent's field. All monsters your opponent controls that can attack must attack this card. Once per turn, you can discard one Cyverse monster to draw 1 card. If this co-linked card is destroyed, you can negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent currently controls. This is a decent monster, and I think it's the boss monster for the archetype for the G-Golems. It does require 2 or more Earth attribute monsters, considering that you probably linked summoned using another of one of your linked monsters. The summoning of this card isn't too difficult, as it starts off with 2800 attack points, and there are cards that boost this card up. Provided this card is co-linked, monsters you control are unaffected by monster effects activated on the opponent's field, so that's a good way of shutting down your opponent's monster effects. All monsters your opponent controls have to attack this card, so this actually protects all your other monsters because they have to force to beat this card before they target anything else. And if this card happens to be destroyed, you're able to shut down all of your opponent's face-up cards. That means not just for until the end of the turn, that's actually permanently, so long as those cards are on the field. You also have the ability to continually draw into cards if you happen to draw into Cyverse cards which are irrelevant for the time, or happen to have a graveyard-based effect. Gravity Balance is a normal spell card. Its effect is, this card is always treated as a G-Golem card. Target 2 of your Earth monsters with the same name that are banished or in your graveyard. Special summon both in defense position, but negate their effects. Change their attack and defense to 0, or to destroy them during the end phase. If a G-Golem monster you control would be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard card instead. You can only use each effect of Gravity Balance once per turn. I would not be considered that a concern with this type of effect. You might think it's going to be a problem as you can only summon into the G-Golem cards. They both summon into defense position and they have 0 attack and defense. They're going to be used for link materials for a link summon. Also, the fact that they're going to be destroyed during the end phase is not concerned. And the secondary part of the effect is just a graveyard style of effect which protects your G-Golem monsters from either battle destruction or card effect destruction. There are a couple of other examples of cards which do pretty much the same for their own archetypes, and so it's not surprised that these have also been introduced within this archetype. Gravekeeper's Trap is a continuous trap card with the effect, while the Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, your opponent cannot activate the effects of cards in the graveyard or special summon monsters from the graveyard. You can only use each of the following effects of Gravekeeper's Trap once per turn. During the main phase, you can discard one card, add one Gravekeeper's or Earth attribute fairy type monster from your deck to your hand. During your opponent's draw phase, before their normal draw, if this card is already face up on the field, declare one card name, look at the cards drawn from their normal draw, and if it was the declared card, send it to the graveyard. This can be a particularly nasty trap card to deal with from your opponent's point of view, because firstly, whilst Exchange of the Spirit is in the graveyard, the opponent cannot use any effects in the graveyard or revive any monsters from the graveyard. This really stifles them. If you combine this with cards such as Necro Valley, it can completely shut down most types of decks, especially those that need to revive from the graveyard and then go into links or to Xyz plays. The other thing you've got to consider is once per turn, just by discarding a card, you're just able to add any of the Gravekeepers or Earth attribute fairy monsters, so it's a consistent way of searching into some of your key cards, and it's discarding any card. It doesn't have to be specifically of a type, archetype, it doesn't have to be a monster, a spell or trap, it could be absolutely anything. And if you can guess correctly what your opponent is going to draw into, if you pair this with certain cards such as, I think Convulsion of Nature is an example, you know exactly what they're going to draw into, or if they've set their deck in a certain way and you actually memorize what they're going to do, that's a way of sending it to the graveyard before it actually is able to do anything. And by forcing your opponent not to be able to draw into those cards, it completely depletes their life points and any resources and any chance of them winning. Now we're going to be covering the secret rares within the Strong Wills pack. First card is Gemknight Seraphonite. It's an Earth attribute fairy type fusion effect monster, level 5 with 2300 attack and 1400 defense. It requires a Gemknight monster and one light monster to summon it, and must be first fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. During your main phase, you can normal summon or set one monster in addition to your normal summon or set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. The reason for having this kind of effect is that some of the Gemknight monsters are Gemknight, which means their typings are only getting their effects if they're summoned twice in a turn. So you could potentially either do that, or you could just help to expand your field by summoning into multiple Gemknight monsters in the same turn. It's decent for a level 5 monster. It's 2300 attack points, so you don't expect too much from it. It does require a Gemknight and a light monster, but there are plenty of each in both the deck, so it's not a specific requirement, and it's not too limiting on it. But I would strongly advise running multiple of these because it's a good way of amplifying your advantage. Advanced Crystal Beast Cobalt Eagle is a wind attribute level 4 monster winged beast with 1400 attack and 800 defense. Its effect is, if Advanced Dark is not in a field zone, send this monster to the graveyard. You can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, add one Advanced Dark from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, you can target one Advanced Crystal Beast card you control, return it to the hand or place it on top of the deck. If this face-up card is destroyed in a monster zone, you can place it in face-up in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell instead of sending it to the graveyard. This is an upgrade of the original Cobalt Eagle, as that was basically meant to recover your Crystal Beast monsters, and those could be from the spell and trap zone and actually return to the top of the deck, very similar to how this works. The difference being that this is also able to search for your field spell card, which is the Advanced Dark, as that's necessary considering that the deck with the Advanced Crystal Beast cannot run without that specific card. Those cards cannot survive on the field without the field spell. Advanced Crystal Beast Sapphire Pegasus is a wind attribute level 4 beast type monster with 1800 attack and 1200 defense. Its effect is, if Advanced Dark is not in a field zone, send this monster to the graveyard. If this card is summoned, you can place one of your Advanced Crystal Beast monsters that is banished or in your hand, deck or graveyard face up in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. If this face up card is destroyed in a monster zone, you can place it face up in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell instead of sending it to the graveyard. The differences between this and the original Sapphire Pegasus is, I think that only recovers cards from the deck and sends them straight onto to the spell and trap zone, whereas with this, it's able to recover those cards either from the deck, the hand, the graveyard, or the banish zone. So it applies to all 4 areas rather than purely just the deck. So you have options depending on how far you've gone into the duel. It also has the same ability and downside as all the advanced Crystal Beast monsters, in that if that specific advanced dark card is not on the field, you're not able to have this card on the field. It gets sent straight to the graveyard. Yugioh, the Ancient Sentinel, is an Earth attribute fairy type level 4 with 1200 attack points and 1600 defense. If a card is sent from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard, except during a damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can special summon one level 4 Earth attribute fairy type monster from your graveyard, except Yugioh, the Ancient Sentinel. If this card is sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you can activate this effect. Each player sends the top 5 cards of their deck to the graveyard, or their entire deck if less than 5. Then, if Exchange with the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can send 5 more cards from the top of either player's deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Yugioh, the Ancient Sentinel, once per turn. The purpose of this card is it's also similar to the other ones in that it's an upgrade of the original version used by Ishizu. By a card being sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard on your opponent's field, it enables you to just special summon this card and revive one of those other cards to the field as well, which also helps trigger off their effects. By having this card sent to the hand or deck to the graveyard, you're able to then pitch 5 cards from yours and your opponent's deck to the graveyard, and if you happen to have Exchange with the Spirit, that's an additional 5 cards to the graveyard. Depending on what you and your opponent is running, it could be devastating if you send your opponent's cards, or you might be wanting to send your cards to help fuel some graveyard-based effects. Of the 3, I don't understand why this was considered the secret rare, as I think it can be just as useful as the other 2, as those were classified as ultra rares. Gemlight Quartz is an Earth attribute fairy type effect monster. It's a level 4 with 1500 attack and 1500 defense. If your opponent controls a monster, you can discard this card, set one fusion continuous spell directly from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except Gemlight monsters. If this card is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banished, you can add one Gemlight monster from your graveyard to your hand except Gemlight Quartz. You can only use each effect of Gemlight Quartz once per turn. This is the additional other card that I was saying paired well with Lady Rose Diamond, as it's also a fairy type as well as being a Gemlight monster. The summon and conditioning on this card isn't bad because you're able to just discard this card so long as your opponent controls a monster to set a fusion continuous spell. There are currently 2 of those within the game to apply directly to Gemnights. There's the Brilliant Diamond and there's another continuous spell card. Both help to use in fusion summoning. The summoning and of this is not bad, as it's equal in both its attack and defense. It's not a difficult one to bring out, and if it's been used as part of a fusion summon, whether this has been used to be sent to the graveyard or banished, you're instantly able to add from the graveyard to your hand another Gemlight monster, so that's a good way of recycling your cards and maintaining your advantage. Medora is an Earth attribute fairy type level 4 with 1200 attack and 1600 defense, and its effect is you can discard one other Earth attribute fairy monster, special summon this card from your hand, then you can place one Grave Creeper's trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap zone as a quick effect. You can banish this card from your field or graveyard and target up to 3 cards in any graveyards, or up to 5 if Exchange of the Spirit is on the field or in your graveyard. Shuffle them into the deck. You can only use each effect of Medora, the Sword Oracle, once per turn. This is the 4th and final piece of the Ishizu support that she kind of generally received, as in the main monsters. The discarding of another Earth attribute to bring this card out isn't bad, and actually you're able to then bring out your Gravekeeper's Trap specifically through this card's effect. As the quick effect to just banish this card to target up to 3 or 5 cards in any graveyards and send them back to the deck, it means that you can reuse cards or you can prevent your opponent from using cards if you happen to have forced them to discard cards which have given them benefits in their graveyard. Gravekeeper's Recruiter is a Dark attribute spellcaster type level 3 with 1200 attack and 1500 defense. Its effect is if this card you control is sent to graveyard, add one Gravekeeper's monster with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand. This is just a general search card for the Gravekeeper archetype and affects most monsters that you could potentially want, outside of those, you know, with the 2000 style of effects, which would be things like the Gravekeeper's Guard. I think that has 1900 defense. There's a couple of restrictions, but as the name goes, Gravekeeper's Recruiter does what it says in the tin. Crystal Skull is a water attribute rock type level 1 with 0 attack and defense. Its effect is if this card is summoned, take 1000 points of damage, then change this card to defense position during the end phase. If you did not take effect damage this turn, you can either add to your hand or special summon one rot monster with 0 attack from your deck. You can only use this effect of Crystal Skull once per turn. As soon as this card is summoned, it inflicts 1,000 points of damage to you, which is not particularly good. It does change itself to defense position, so unless your opponent has anything that inflicts piercing damage, you should be fine. But if you haven't taken any damage, you're able to then search or special summon a rot monster with 0 attack from your deck. It's a very niche type of effect, and it was used within Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. It was one of the earlier episodes where Yusei Fudo ended up being put in jail after dueling, I think it was Jack Atlas, and he met someone with this crystal ancient type of deck that would inflict, I think it was like burn damage to yourself, but there were certain cards within the deck which would reflect the damage to your opponent. That was the idea and the premise of the entire deck. G-Golem Dignified Trithalon is an Earth Attribute Cyberse type Link monster. It's Link 4 and has 3,200 attack points. It requires 2 or more Earth Attribute monsters. All monsters your opponent controls must attack this card if able. Once per battle, if this card battles an opponent's monster before damage calculation. As a quick effect, you can send 1 Earth Attribute monster from your hand to the graveyard. Until the end of this turn, that opponent's monster loses 200 attack. Also negate its effect. When your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a Link monster you control, as a quick effect, you can negate that effect, and if you do, destroy that card. You can only use this effect of G-Golem Dignified Trithalon once per turn. This is really the boss monster of the G-Golem archetype. It does require potentially up to 4 monsters in order to summon it, but if you go through the various Link ratings, you can summon it with as minimal as 2 Earth monsters. It forces your opponent's monsters to attack into it instead of your other monsters, so it does protect those weaker ones, provided this card's effect isn't negated. It does also have the ability to reduce your opponent's monsters that are battling by 200 points. It's not particularly that powerful. It might have been better 200 times the level of the monster sent, but that's me just in a dream state at the moment. But it does also come with the effect to negate those cards' effects, and being able to do that is actually quite useful. Also, being able to negate and destroy those cards is a good way of blocking your opponent from recovering resources. G-Golem Crystal Heart is a water attribute Cyberse type Link monster with 2 Link points, and it has 0 attack points. Its effect is you can target 1 Earth attribute Link monster in your graveyard, special summon it to your zone this card points to, and if you do, place 1 GG counter on this card. You can only use this effect of G-Golem Crystal Heart once per turn. Earth monsters co-linked to this card gain 600 attack for each GG counter on this card, and can make a second attack during each battle phase. Also, if they attack a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. This is kind of the center point of the deck. Whilst all those other cards can achieve their own attack points quite neatly, and they have standardized attack points, this is a good way of not only recovering those Earth Link monsters from the graveyard back to this card, but for each counter that's on this card, they gain 600 attack points. So if you've got multiples, you've got multiple forms of 600, potentially they have the ability to attack twice in a turn. This isn't specifically against monsters, it can be both towards monsters and to direct attacks, and they also have piercing damage, so if your opponent is running a defense position deck, then that's no longer an advantage for them. Rainbow Bridge of the Heart is a continuous spell card. With the effect, during your main phase, you can normal summon 1 Crystal Beast monster in addition to your normal summoner set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. You can only use each effect of the following effects of Rainbow Bridge of the Heart once per turn. During your main phase, you can destroy 1 Crystal Beast card you control or in your hand, and if you do, add 1 crystal spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. If a Crystal Beast card is placed in your spell and trap zone, even during the damage step, you can target 1 card your opponent controls, return both that card and this card to the hand. The benefit of this card is it does allow for a double summon each and every turn, so you can go for additional normal summons of your Crystal Beast monsters, which is typically one of their downsides, that they cannot actually get multiple of them onto the field without relying on their specific spell and trap cards to support that. In terms of the first bit of the effect, by during the main phase destroying a Crystal Beast card you control, you're able to also search for any of the crystal spell and trap cards, so this is a good way of searching for any of the specific ones you need for that time. I know that Crystal Abundance can be very useful at certain points to just actually send cards to the graveyard and then revive yours to then direct attack into your opponent. That can be a very strong strategy, even if it's quite a simple one, and it happens to also work in that if your Crystal Beast ends up being sent into the spell and trap zone, that includes during the battle, that can send both this card and the monster that attacked, that was responsible for the attack, or any of the other cards they have on the field, back to their hand. That can be quite difficult to recover from if they've gone into specific cards, such as the extra deck monsters that need resources in order to summon them. Scatter Fusion is a continuous spell card. Its effect is during a main phase, if your opponent controls a monster, you can fusion summon one non-rock Gem Knight monster from your extra deck using monsters from your deck as materials. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except Gem Knight monsters. You can only use this effect of Scatter Fusion once per turn. When this card leaves the field, destroy all monsters summoned by this card's effect. This could be very useful in certain circumstances, in that so long as your opponent has a monster on the field, you're able to instantly summon any of the non-rock Gem Knight monsters immediately just using those cards from your deck as the fusion materials. Think of it as like having a future fusion, but that you can continue to do that each and every turn, so long as this card happens to be on the field. The major downside of this card is that when it leaves the field, you instantly lose all those cards, so you need to find a way of protecting this card, whether that be through things such as, there's something similar to the continuous spell card Field Barrier. There's that protects field spells. There's something similar, I think, that actually works on continuous spell and traps, and so you'd have to be running that consistently within this deck to rely upon it. Advanced Dart is a continuous spell card. Its effect is all Crystal Beast monsters on the field and in the graveyard become dark. If an ultimate crystal monster attacks, negate the effects of all the attack targets during the battle phase during damage calculation. If a Crystal Beast monster you control battles and you would take damage, you can send one Crystal Beast monster from your deck to graveyard. You take no battle damage from that battle. The benefit of this card is that it turns all your Crystal Beast monsters into the dark versions of themselves, so you can actually go into the Rainbow Dark Dragon very easily, as they're considered both in the field and on the graveyard as dark attributes. If it happens to be an ultimate crystal monster, so that can be the Rainbow Dragon, it can be the Rainbow Dark Dragon, or any of these fusion alternatives that are also classified in the same naming, you're able to shut down your opponent's monster's effects whilst it's attacking. And if you happen to be having your life points threatened, you can send a Crystal Beast monster to the graveyard to take no damage. It's an easier way to recover from the graveyard than sometimes it is from the deck. Temple of the Kings is a continuous spell card. With the effect, you can activate one trap card the turn it was set. You can send one Mythical Beast of Circuit in your monster zone and this card you control to the graveyard. Special summon one monster from your hand or deck, or one fusion monster from your extra deck. You can only use each effect of Temple of the Kings once per turn. The benefits of this card are that this simply allows you to activate your trap cards the turn they are set, so you do have instant response from traps. There are very few cards that actually do that outside of the modern Yu-Gi-Oh days, where things such as Infinite Impermanence can be activated from the hand so long as you meet other conditions. By sending this alongside a Mystical Beast Circuit to the graveyard, you're just able to bring out either any of your powerful monsters from the hand, deck, or even a fusion monster from the extra deck, and it doesn't have to follow any of those conditions. Crystal Miracle is a counter trap card with the effect, when a spell or trap or monster effect is activated, destroy one Crystal Beast card you control, and if you do, negate that activation, and if you do that, destroy that card. If a Crystal Beast card is placed in your spell and trap zone while this card is in the graveyard, even during the damage step, you can banish this card, place one Crystal Beast monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard, face up in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. You can only use this effect of Crystal Miracle once per turn. This is the Crystal Beast equivalent to things such as Solemn Judgment or Solemn Warning, any type of negation type of effect, and it's specific to that archetype. This happens to just destroy a Crystal Beast to negate any of those types of effects, but it also comes with the benefit of being able to take a Crystal Beast monster from the hand, the deck, or the graveyard and place it immediately into your spell and trap zone, so you have easier access to it. Exchange of Despair and Hope is a normal trap card, and its effect is, if you control 3 or more Earth attribute fairy monsters, send as many monsters from the field to the graveyard as possible, minimum 1. Then each player can special summon monsters from their opponent's graveyard to their own field up to the number of monsters sent to their opponent's grave by this effect. Then if a monster was special summoned by this effect and Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can set one trap directly from your deck. It can be activated during this turn. You can only activate one Exchange of Despair and Hope per turn. The purpose of this card is you're going to be having quite weak monsters within your deck, so that hopefully your opponent has higher attack and very powerful monsters. By switching into those cards, you're able to switch the cards that you basically revive your opponent's powerful monsters, and they really can't do anything as they'll be taking some of your weak monsters that may not have any decent attack points, and that can be a real disadvantage to them. Also, you get the benefit, if Exchange of the Spirit is in the graveyard, to be able to set a trap card which you can activate also during this turn. Rainbow Bridge of Salvation is a normal trap card, and its effect is, if there are 2 or more different monster types among the level 10 or higher monsters on the field, shuffle all cards except this one from both players' hands, fields, and graveyards into the deck. Then each player draws 5 cards. cards. You can banish this card from your graveyard to add one Crystal Beast monster and one field spell from your deck to your hand. You can only apply each effect of Rainbow Bridge of Salvation once per duel. This is a decent card provided there are two different monsters which happen to be level 10 or higher, so this can actually be quite difficult to achieve unless your opponent is playing something specifically quite high level as well. It does pretty much reset all the cards as it shuffles everything from hand, field and graveyards back into the deck, and you redraw as well as your opponent. This can be advantageous in some cases in which you draw into something appropriate, or if you disrupt your opponent from the setup they already have. It also lets you banish this card to add a Crystal Beast and a field spell, so hopefully this adds to your advantage and puts you in a position where you're actually getting more from this card than your opponent. The downside is it can only be used once per duel, so I would advise always just running this as a one-off within your deck.